Okay, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome. This is our Sabbath morning study session. I wanted to take just a minute to tell you about something that we're going to start doing. James has talked with me, and we've thought about this idea that if some of you have signed up for our newsletter on our website, you can go to unitedisrael.org, and you'll see on the right a place where you can sign up for updates. We've used that in the past, the mailing list that generates, to send out notices and so forth, but we want to do something a little bit more regular. So I've got this idea that I'm going to be talking with Ralph Bunton and James and the Tylers and a few others, our local group, about putting out what I want to call the United Israel Bulletin. And the reason I want to call it that is to somehow, in some way, connect with our rich history. We've got a lot going on the website. For those of you who haven't been in a while, you might want to check that out. But in between Ralph's popular series, the Remembering David Horowitz series, he's at number 24 on his installments now. If you have a nice rainy day in your area, I highly encourage you, if you've not been keeping up with those, to go back and read them in consecutive order. It's some amazing history about how United Israel and David Horowitz plugged in some incredible ways since 1944. So anyway, I want you to think about that. And then he also has a new series, Portraits of the Past, where we have this incredible archive of photographs that picture David Horowitz and so forth with world leaders. His latest is already up. I think he's up to number 4 in that series. So in other words, those kind of things need highlighting. People are busy. They get busy and they don't check very often. And so I thought about every Friday before Shabbat to send out a bulletin and sort of bring back that element of nostalgia and bring it into the future, you know, because United Israel is a viable organization. It's been going since 1944. It's touched the world stage. Chad is here. We spent a lot of time this week talking about this very thing. So I want to send out this bulletin and post news and various things. Dr. Tabor is constantly working on publishing and putting out incredible, insightful articles as well. His new website, jamestabor.com, is really, it's just taken a makeover thanks to Anna, and she's helped us on our site as well. Thanks, Anna. And so if you think about it, every Friday you can begin to look for a United Israel Bulletin, and I'm going to even post in there an email address that I want you to use if you have news, you know, as the community of United Israel, maybe the birth of a child or a wedding or something like that, because these are the kind of things that David did. And I just sort of, this week in this beautiful building that we have, surrounded by things that belong to him, I thought, you know, in a way, that's another way to honor our rich history and to begin to, I guess, pave the way for United Israel in the new digital age. So think about that. And if you've not yet signed up for our newsletter, please do so on our website. So here we go. We are presently working through week by week according to the ancient triennial portions. These are indicated in the Hebrew Bible, in the text that we've received, and they're designated by the earliest scribes according to what I've defined and what I've taught you about the white spaces. So if you follow along in the Hebrew Bible, you'll notice that these white spaces mark divisions within the text. I like to think of them as rightly dividing the word of truth. Anciently, they didn't have chapter and verse designations, but these white spaces would indicate transition from section to section, from portion to portion. So as you know, we are now following along, not according to the annual cycle of readings, but according to this ancient triennial cycle of readings. And we are presently in our second week of what I guess I would call the patriarchal period, the patriarchal stories. We began 2 weeks ago. We were introduced to Avram, where it just gives an announcement 2 weeks ago of his birth to Terah. And then last week we began to talk about the person, the character of Avram. And so we spent a lot of time discussing the call of Avram. We traced his journey from Ur of the Chaldeans into the region known as Haran. And then, as it puts it in the TEB, Canaan word, Canaan, towards Canaan. We traced that, and we noted that whether or not the call, the actual call, came to Avram while he was still in Ur, as it says in Nehemiah chapter 9, or whether or not it follows chronologically in Genesis 12 and the call comes to him in Haran. Neither of those are as vital as getting the point of the call. Because when you talk about the call of Avram, you're talking about this incredible call that contained promises from Jehovah that involved a departure, if you will, from everything that was familiar, and it required going to places unseen. We discussed that. We also discussed that should Avram should he choose to accept this mission, that he would be rewarded greatly. In fact, when you look at Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, what we find is that the series of promises that include a blessing begin with, "And I will make of you a goy gadol," a big nation, a great nation, of which there is much to say that we are not yet ready to go into. But he says further, "I will bless you, and I will make your name great." And then it says this, "You be a blessing." It's a command to be a blessing, Avram. He's already said, "I'll make of you a goy gadol, I'll make your name great, and you be a blessing." And then what follows, I've always taken as basically dependent on his accepting the charge to be a blessing. If Avram becomes a blessing, it says, "And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those that esteem you lightly." So it's all contingent. It's all depending on whether or not Avram accepts this call. And ultimately, the blessing of blessings is that in you, Avram, all the families of the earth will be blessed. It's quite an incredible series of points that are made in Genesis chapter 12. And what it does is it sets the stage for everything that happens going forward from this point forward. Further, last week, we discussed that there was a promise of a seed, not a single seed as many have supposed, but a seed that is as numerous as the dust of the earth. That this seed would be what ushers in this age of blessing of which the writers speak. But the problem is that Sarai is barren. It introduces into the story somewhat of a difficulty because Avram is aged, Sarai is aged, and yet somehow he's told that if these things come to pass, not only will this series of blessings take place, but it will take place through a seed, a specific family. As James Tabor often says, beginning in Genesis chapter 12, the Bible shifts its focus into a single family. The prophet Amos says, "You alone have I known of all the families of the earth." Ultimately, that blessing is to spread throughout all the earth. The goal of the prophets is that the knowledge of God will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea, that from the rising of the sun to its setting, that they will know the one God of Israel. In this particular story, we learn as we progress through the patriarchal narratives, through the story of Avram, we learn that Avram and Lot of the family of Terah, who've come from the other side, have increased their possessions greatly. Their wealth is described in the Hebrew Bible as heavy. They are laden with things, with property, with people. God is beginning to bless this semi-nomadic family in a way that is quite incredible. Truly, they are becoming great. But they were unable, we read last week, to sit as one, as the TEB translation puts it. And a contention arose. In Hebrew, the word contention that arises between Avram and between Lot, or actually between the herdsmen of each, is the Hebrew word riv, and it means contention. It means strife. And Avram set out. We're going to learn some things about the character of Avram. Avram sets out to ease this tension that is beginning to develop between the herdsmen of each group. He says in Genesis chapter 13, verse 8, "Let not, please, there be contention between us." So Avram, in order to ease the tension, to eliminate the strife, to put down this hostility between the two groups, does something quite interesting. It's something that I think has implications for the modern day. Something that I haven't noticed until today, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit. What Avram does, in order to bring peace to the region, he offers Lot his choice of land. And Lot chooses the well-watered, it says. He chooses what's called the circuit of the Jordan. Now, this was the narrator wants us to know, this was before Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed. This is before God's wrath comes on the area. In other words, if you think of the area he's describing, and you've been there, right, Dave? You think, what well-watered? I mean, what? But he chooses this particular area, the choice. And Avram is willing, for the price of peace, to give the best. After they separated, we read that Jehovah appears to Avram, and he promises both land and progeny. He tells him, even after Avram has given this choice land to Lot, lift up your eyes and look around. Look to the north, look to the south, look to the east, look to the west. For all of this I will give to you and to your seed after you. And our story ended last week in peace, with Lot sitting, now get this, Lot is sitting among the bad and errant against Jehovah. Lot finds a place to sit. Though the land is beautiful, he is sitting among the scornful, if you will. As I read the story of the sitting of these two, I can't help but think of Psalm 1, where it clearly differentiates between those who sit not in the seat of the scornful and this other group. Lot, it says, we know from the story that those in the region of Sodom and Gomorrah are bad and errant against Jehovah, and Lot is sitting in their midst. Avram, on the other hand, is pictured as seated under the oaks of Mamre. He's near an altar. He's near Hebron. The picture that begins to emerge is that Avram is a peaceful man, willing to do whatever it takes to bring peace to the region. And he's seated near an altar in a specific place. One can't help but think of the phrase, location, location, location. In this week's reading, the situation quickly changes. It deteriorates. It's for the worse. We go from bad to worse. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is that a couple of words stood out last night in this particular reading as I sat at this table and I had Bibles and books and Hebrew surrounding me and Bible programs up. It was almost as if the thing that jumped out I never expected, the word that is used and repeated over and over and over, I've never talked about when I was in this particular place in Scripture. It's been right there before me the whole time. It's a word that appears for the first time in this reading, and it signals a new form of bad and wickedness. A bad and wickedness that has not been mentioned before, that comes upon the land, if you will. And I'm wondering if you might know what it is. When I read later, I think it will become obvious. In this particular story in Genesis chapter 14, so different is this narrative portion than the rest of Genesis, than the patriarchal narratives, that scholars are at a loss to find a place for it. In other words, it pictures Avram in a different way than we've seen him. And so what they do is the academics began to look and say, you know, this doesn't fit neatly in the genre of the rest of the patriarchal narrative. It must be from a separate source. Just Genesis 14. So different. We'll talk about that. We're also introduced to a designation, an epithet for Avram that we will seek to understand, one that I think the text indicates what it means, and I think that this class today will sort of help us to get a better handle on what this term means, and we're going to talk about that as well. See, I have a lot to talk about today, in only 24 verses, I might add. And we will encounter a figure whose character led to many questions and to much speculation. He is the Bible's first priest. Before any other priest is born, before we ever meet the children of Israel, before there is a children of Israel, before there are the 12 tribes, before there is a Levi, we meet with the world's most interesting man. One who received tithes from Avram. He's a priest, get this, he's a priest without an altar and who requires no blood. The world's most interesting priest. I want you to open your Bibles with me this morning to Genesis chapter 14. Hopefully you have downloaded the Transparent English Bible's version. And I'm going to give you a second to get there because I want to open the Hebrew as well. And this is only because I need to check one thing before I begin to read. Genesis chapter 14. All right, beginning in verse 1. And it was in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar. Now, I always like to look at this word in Hebrew. Kedar Laomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim. They did battle with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah. Shinab, king of Admah. Shemaber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. These joined toward the valley of Siddim and in the sea of Salt. 2 and 10 years they served Kedar Laomer, and the 3 and 10 years they rebelled. And in the 4 and 10 year, Chador Laomer came, and the kings that were with him, and they struck the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zuzim and Ham, and the Emim and Shaveh Kiriataim, and the Horite and the Mount Seir unto El Paran, which is upon the desert. They returned and came toward Ein Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and they struck all the field of the Amalekite. Then also the Amorite who were sitting in Hazazon Tamar, and the king of Sodom went out, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. And they set in order with them in a battle in the valley of Siddim. And then Kedar Laomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, the king of Goim, and Amraphel, the king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings with the 5. The valley of Siddim had pits of smear, and they fled. The king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, and they fell toward there. And those being left fled mountainward, and they took all the gathered property of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their eatable things, and they walked. And they took Lot and his gathered property, the son of the brother of Avram, and they walked, for he was sitting in Sodom. And an escaper came, and he told to Avram the Hebrew that he was dwelling by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and they were lords of a pact of Avram. And Avram heard that his brother was taken captive, and he emptied his trained ones, brought forth of his house 8 and 10 and 300, and he pursued unto Dan. And he was divided against them by night, he and his servants, and he struck them and pursued them unto Hobah, that is to or at the left of Damascus. And he made return all the gathered property, and also Lot his brother and his gathered property he made return, and also the women and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from striking Kedar Laomer and the kings that were with him toward the valley of Shaveh, that is the valley of the king. And Melchi-Zedek, king of Shalem, made to go out bread and wine, for he was priest to El Elyon. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Avram to El Elyon, the one possessing skies and land. And blessed be El Elyon, who has delivered your oppressors in your hand. And he gave to him 1/10 from all. The king of Sodom said toward Avram, Give to me the life breathers, and the gathered property take for yourself. And Avram said toward the king of Sodom, I've made my hand lifted up toward Jehovah, El Elyon, the one possessing skies and land, if from a thread and unto a thong of a sandal, and if I take from all that is to you, and you do not say, I've made Abraham rich, except only that which the lads have eaten, and the divisions of the men that walked with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, they will take their division. Our story today signals a new threat to peace in the region, a region that is otherwise destined for peace. And Avram, who had only been known to us, or the one that we knew only up until this point as a peace-seeking patriarch, one who restored tranquility with Lot in the midst of brewing contention by trading land for peace, he, Avram, knowing full well, both before and after giving land for peace, that all of it belonged to him anyway. One who, had his own family been left alone, would have remained quietly resting under, as the biblical writers put it later, his own vine and his own fig tree. Indeed, a new bad arose. A new form of wickedness among the nations surrounding the land of promise began to spill over into a region destined otherwise for peace. And it directly affected the friend of God. It came in, this bad and errant and wicked way comes in stealthily through the agency of a concept devised among the nations. It's not a concept that Avram and Lot dream up. It's defined by a single word. The word we use to translate the cause of the present bad is a very simple word, but it's a four-letter word. Not that kind of four-letter word, but very close. King. King is the word of which I speak. 28 times in the Torah portion, this single chapter, in 24 verses, in Genesis chapter 14, 28 times in one form or another, the word king arises. It is the way of the nations. In the first verse, we have the first mention of king. And that first verse ends in the word goyim. It's as if the writer wants us to know that when we talk of kings, we're talking about the way of the nations. These kings, we learn in the second verse, they did or they made, depending on how you read the Hebrew asah, they did or made something that we've not yet read about. That word in Hebrew is milchama. Milchama. It means battle. It means war. Until we see the word king, we don't see the word milchama. Kings, the way of the nations, brings a new bad to the world. And this milchama is executed one group of kings against another group of kings. Now, much conjecture as to who these kings are. Perhaps their identity is or has been shrouded by the dust of the past. We do have proposals, though. We have various ideas put forth by various scholars as to who these kings might be, historically, if you will. I want you to notice that when the story begins, we have the narrator telling us that this begins in the days of Amraphel, as if we're to know who this person is. The days of Amraphel. It has been proposed that Amraphel is none other than Hammurabi. Hammurabi, many of you know, Amraphel is from Shinar. Shinar is Babylon. Hammurabi is from Babylon. He is known as the great codifier of Babylonian law. You remember that the Hammurabi Code, if you will, was discovered. And this is quite insightful for students and scholars of the ancient Near East. It gives us a picture as to what was the law of the land in those days, if you will. Hammurabi reigned from 1945 to 1902 before the Common Era. It puts him approximately in the right time, depending. I know that people can debate dates and times and ad nauseum. But this Hammurabi is also called Amurapi, which sounds very close to Amraphel. You'll notice the the mem, the p, It's got many of the consonantal connections there, Amrapi and Amraphel. And Talmudic sources tell us that Amraphel is none other than Nimrod. According to the Living Torah, which I pulled off the shelf last night, it listed several sources which indicated that many of the great sages believed that Nimrod, the great hunter that we're introduced to in Genesis chapter 10, is Amraphel. But whether we can identify them all with historical figures, or perhaps the names are meant to make a point, we may never know. For instance, when I read this story, the thing that stands out, we know about Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah is destined for the fall. We're going to see that shortly. But the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah have interesting names. We know that they are bad and errant against Jehovah. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah are named Birah and Birsha. The ba sound on the front indicates in. Birah is in bad. Birsha is in wickedness. And could it be that our story is trying to tell us that these kings were bad and evil? The bottom line is that here in this portion, we read of what I would say, according to recorded history, is truly the First World War. The region is turned upside down. We can read through this and we can go through it quickly, and it's only 24 verses. And of those, perhaps it's only half dealing with this war. But I want you to get that 28 times the word king, this king against this king, and these kings were confederate against the other. The idea is that the world as it was at the time is literally at war one with the other. Milchama, brought on by Gentile kings, attacking Gentile kings who had grown weary of serving others and rebelled, leading to the wrathful vengeance of one against the other. Perhaps we should learn through this something of the nature of the king, but I doubt we will. Perhaps we can learn from the Bible's most ancient parable. Now, many of you may or may not know this, but there is an ancient parable that's told in the book of Judges. It's told by Yotam, Yotam's parable. And Yotam is the only surviving son of Yerubbaal when 70 of his brothers had been slaughtered. I want you to go with me to the book of Judges, to Judges chapter 9, and I want to read to you this particular parable. Understand that this is written in such a way, if you read the context, this is a very, very horrible situation. As I said, the sons of Jerubbaal have all been killed, 70 of them, but one escapes. One escapes by the name of Yotam, and the question concerns who will be our king. Beginning in verse 8, it says, the trees once went out to anoint a king over themselves. Now, I want to tell you something, that this is the first occurrence of the word anoint once one gets into the prophets. And when I say prophets, I mean that section of scripture. You have the Torah, and then when you get into Joshua and Judges and first, and you work your way through, you are in the prophets, that section of scripture. So this is the first time that anoint is used. And by the way, it is the first time that the anointing or the anointed one is associated with a king. So we should learn something from this. The trees once went out, verse 8, to anoint a king over themselves. So they said to the olive tree, reign over us. And the olive tree answered them, shall I stop producing my rich oil by which gods and mortals are honored, and go to sway over the trees? And then the trees said to the fig tree, you come and reign over us. But the fig tree answered them, shall I stop producing my sweetness and my delicious fruit, and go to sway over the trees? And then the trees said to the vine, you come and reign over us. But the vine said to them, shall I stop producing my wine that cheers gods and mortals, and go to sway over the trees? Now pay attention. So all the trees said to the bramble, you come and reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, if in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. And this particular parable is quite interesting. The trees represent the people whose only God is Jehovah. They begin to want to be like those around them. Yotam's parable is meant to sting. Yotam's parable is meant to show what drives one to want to rule over another. And he thinks about and he puts forward these words that should truly touch us when we read them. Over and over, you go to those that would make in your eyes a great leader. You come reign over us, and one after the other says, shall I leave that which I do, which is pleasing? Now notice the phrase, to go hold sway over the trees. This idea that is put forward is to reign over one is refused time and time and time again, until, interestingly enough, a bramble steps forward and says, well, I'll do it. But I happen to wonder if we can learn from this either. It seems that the bramble among us find a way always to convince us to let them rule over us, to submit to their rule. In our story, in the bloodthirst of battle, the people, the Gentile rulers, if you will, took captive of Lot and his people and his things, and they went away. An escapee or an escaper, one who gets away, if you will, from that captured group, makes his way back to one who was sitting peacefully under his own vine and fig tree. One who had previously been willing even to trade land for peace. One who had shown himself willing to do whatever it took to avoid contention and strife. One who sought not to rule over others, but to live at peace with his neighbors. This one was a relative newcomer to the region, whose right to the region was not based on longevity in the land. I want you to think about what I'm saying today. He can't base his right to the region because of longevity in the land. Rather, he bases his living in that place upon a whisper, upon a promise of land and progeny that came to him in a still small voice. Avram was dwelling at this point peacefully, undisturbed, and not disturbing the native inhabitants of the land of his sojourning. He even has made a pact. He's made peace with his excuse me, with his Amorite neighbors. He's in covenant with this group that has been there longer than he. He's at peace. He's near the oaks of Mamre, who is one of three brothers. These are Amorite boys, Mamre, Eshcol, and Aner. And the three of them are lords of the pact. Now look, with Avram, these three Amorite guys are friends of the friend of God. Now, this hit me last night. I'm thinking, it's saying something. At the end of our story, by the way, today, when they come back and they're dividing up the spoil and the booty, as we call it, they're trying to divide out. Avram says something interesting. He raises his hand and he said, look, I'm paraphrasing, there's one thing you will not say about Avram is you made me rich. Look, I don't want anything. You're not going to say you made me rich. Now, as far as my Amorite boys here, they can have what they need. You see, Avram's mindset is different than the world around him. He comes across, once disturbed, he goes forward into battle because he must. Avram was the outsider. He's called Ha'ivri, the Ivri. Now there's dispute over the meaning. Almost always this term, Ivri, is used by others. You know, Avram didn't say, hello, I don't know, maybe he did. We don't have record of him saying, hello, I'm Avram Ha'ivri. Others called him Ha'ivri, the Ivri. This epithet likely indicated that he was the one who was not native. Rather, he had come or crossed over from the other side of the great river. Now, some scholars, ancient and modern, seek to make this phrase Ivri go back to a distant ancestor by the name of Eber. And so they say the Ivri descend from Eber, but I don't see that particularly. I think it's the former, and so I align here with Rashi. Rashi also believed that the Ivri is a name that was placed upon Avram and those who would follow him, his descendants, his household, as the ones who are not from here. They came in later. They crossed over. And the name stuck. The name stuck. I love the term. And I especially love how later Jonah would embrace the term when he's addressing the Gentile sailors, who certainly would know that when he said, I am an Ivri, they would know, I know who you are now. I know that you're in the region from another area. When he says in Jonah chapter 1, verse 9, I am a Hebrew, Ivri Anoki. I am a Hebrew. Jehovah, God of the skies and heaven, I fear, maker of the sea and dry land. With news from the escapee that his family had been taken, Avram and 318 of his house, they divided by night. They struck the enemies. They pursued them the length of the land. When you look at the geographical map, so to speak, of where the battles are taking place, we're talking about going all the way up into the Golan. I mean, they're at the Dead Sea. They go all, I mean, this is a world war. It's a regional conflict that covers the entirety of the biblical landscape. It's massive. This trek, the battles and so forth. Ultimately, Avram returns with everyone safe, and he returns victorious. Now, Avram, upon his return, is met by one of whom much has been made. Now, the name of this one who meets Avram on his return is mentioned only 2 times in the Hebrew Bible, and there are debates as to whether or not the second is the same as the first. In chapter 14, I want to read this encounter once more because it's very very much a part of what I want to talk about now. In Genesis 14:18, it says, and Melchi-Zedek, king of Shalem, made to go out bread and wine, for he was priest to El Elyon. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Avram to El Elyon, the one possessing skies and land, and blessed be El Elyon, who has delivered your oppressors in your hand. And he gave to him 1/10 from all. And you will note, please, that in this passage, we get very little. There's not much there. Now, what have I been trying to tell you? It's that whenever people encounter little, they tend to create a lot. We just don't know. I mean, if you were only to read this text, there are some things we can know. But boy, it sure opens the door to come up with all sorts of incredible ideas. His name is Melchi-Zedek. And when I grew up in the church, we called the man Melchi-Zedek. Melchi-Zedek. I know no one else called him that. But in Hebrew, the name Melchi-Zedek is quite beautiful. If I were still having children, which I'm not, I have 6 and I have 5 grandchildren, and I'm not sure I can convince my kids to call one of their children Melchi-Zedek. But I think Melchi-Zedek Nichols has a real, maybe Ty would do that. Maybe I can talk to him, or Zachariah. Huh? Melchi. Yeah, Mel. Yeah, call him Mel. All right, so I want you to go, and it says that he's king of Shalem. What can we know? One thing that we can feel fairly safe and sure about is to identify where he is king. And here's the passage that I have in my notes. It's from chapter 76 of Psalm 76. Let's see. Let me make sure that's it. Yeah, it's chapter 76, verse 2. I believe it's verse 3 in the Hebrew. I had verse 3. I must have been looking at the Hebrew. But it's verse 2. His abode has been established in Salem, his dwelling place in Zion. This particular passage is used and commented on by many, the Targum, by Rashi, by Josephus in Antiquities 1, everyone, all ancient authorities that I could find in my library this week indicate that Salem is an early form, an early designation, an early name for what later would be called Jerusalem. Jerusalem. Melchi-Zedek. What else can we know? Melchi-Zedek, the name means either my righteous king or my king of righteousness or something. The idea is that this is a righteous ruler. He's a priest. The narrator wants us to know that we should know he's a priest, though we've never encountered the word priest. This is the first occurrence of priest. Well, how do you know? The Hebrew says ki, because. Like, how would you recognize a priest? Well, a priest, he brought forth bread and wine and he gave a blessing. Because that's what priests do. He says, blessed be Avram de El Elyon, the one possessing skies and land, and blessed be El Elyon, who has delivered your oppressors in your hand. The meaning of El Elyon in the ancient Near East, the phrase El was a designation. We know that the Canaanites, the people of the land, referred to their chief deity as El. Above the pantheon of gods in the region, El is that name, right? It means power, might. It's indicative of incredible power and so forth. So when you say in Hebrew El Elyon, Elyon is tied, we believe, to the idea, this root meaning of Allah, which means to be up. Like an olah is a burnt offering. So this word to go up is tied to this same idea. So when he says he is a Kohen of El Elyon, it means he's a priest of the highest God. So like we say most high, El Elyon, it's like the highest El. Now, the question becomes, who is Melchi-Zedek? Who is Melchi-Zedek? A lot comes in later. Now, what I want to do is I want to first go to Psalm 110, because this passage is the only other occurrence of the name Melchi-Zedek in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament, if you will. And Psalm 110 says, the Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord sends out from Zion your mighty scepter, rule in the midst of your foes. Your people, by the way, I'm reading the New Revised Standard Version. This is an old Bible I'm using because it has cool notes in it. Your people will offer themselves willingly on the day you lead your forces on the holy mountains. From the womb of the morning, like dew, your youth will come to you. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchi-Zedek. The Lord is at your right hand. He will shatter kings on the day of his wrath. He will execute judgment among the nations, filling them with corpses. He will shatter heads over the wide earth. He will drink from the stream by the path. Therefore, he will lift up his head. Psalm 110. This particular psalm is one that I think has created as much, or let me change the way I word this. The way people read this text has created as much, if not more, confusion than any other text in all the Bible. The Lord said unto my Lord. When we say Lord in English, and I'm especially thinking of Christianity, but it can be any number of other choices, but especially in Christianity, when someone says, call on the name of the Lord, you know, and I just love the Lord, well, they might have something in mind that the Hebrew Bible does not have in mind. Let's just put it that way. So, for instance, in Psalm 110:1, it's actually, if you notice, even in most English translations, and most of you know this, you have Yod-He Vav-He said unto my Lord. It's different in the Hebrew, and it even comes out in English, because you'll see most translations, at least they give us the first Lord mentioned is in all caps. Generally, though not always, generally English translations are faithful in this, that when they hide the name from you, they at least put the false name in all caps, so you can look that up. Now, Yehovah says unto my master, sit at my right hand. Now, a lot of people will try to make this, you know, once they have a little bit of Hebrew knowledge, and they can go, oh, you know, these people are not, their false doctrines are blown away by this, because, but it is still pretty amazing. It does put someone, because if you read through this, when you get to verse 5, I'm not going into this today, but if you get to verse 5, I want you to really study this out. Who is on the right of whom? You know, it kind of gets a little bit tricky there. So it's not as simple as going, oh, well, this guy on the right, he's just a regular guy. And this psalm exalts this figure, whoever it is. Now, many people will say it's a monarch type psalm, a psalm about this divine king, if you will, so to speak. But where it says, you are a priest le'olam, a priest forever. And we're going to kind of look at this for a second. It's one thing to be a priest. It's another thing to be a priest le'olam, for an indeterminate age. The next phrase is a little tricky. In Hebrew, it says divrati. Divrati. Let me open up let me make sure I have the Hebrew before me while I'm talking about this. In Psalm 110, I'm looking at verse 4. Psalm 110, verse 4. Get this thing cooking here. Because we want to take a little bit closer look. In Hebrew, it says, Ata kohen leolam al divrati Melchi-Zedek. You are a priest forever, al divrati Melchi-Zedek, al divrati. Now, it's translated al divrati, after the order. And when they do this, what they're doing is, if you look this up, if you study this out, you'll find that divrati is attributed by most scholars of Hebrew to be tied to a word divra, which means cause, manner, reason. In other words, you're a priest forever, according to, you see where they get it, according to the order or the manner of. But it's been proposed, and this could very well be, that divrati is tied to the word of, according to the word of. In other words, there's a difference there that could indicate that it's not this order like a ranking, you know, according to the ranking or so forth. But this is an interesting figure, this Melchi-Zedek. Targum Yonatan, Rashi, and others will say that Melchi-Zedek is Shem, the son of Noah. Now, thanks to Peggy Sanders, we have this really cool chart, and it wouldn't show. I'm not going to show it right this second. But what it does is, it's a world timeline based on the chronology laid out in the Bible. And whenever you look at this chronology, you can see that Shem is indeed alive during the days of Avram. If you add up the ages and so forth, you'll see this. So it is interesting. So many of the Jewish sources will tell us that Melchi-Zedek is Shem, the son of Noah. Now, the New Testament, many of you know this. I grew up in the church. The New Testament, what it does is, with Melchi-Zedek, this interesting person, is it exalts the Christ to this priesthood in the book of Hebrews. So in Hebrews chapter 5 through 7 is where it really gets into this idea of Melchi-Zedek. Now, in Hebrews chapter 5 through 7, and I'll just hit the high points, it lets us know that the name means King of Righteousness. Okay, and you could go, well, yeah, I mean, I get that. It says that he is the King of Salem, which means the King of Peace. This is what the writer of Hebrews says. Now, notice this. Without father and mother, genealogy, neither beginning of days nor end of life, resembling the Son of God, remaining a priest forever. The writer of Hebrews says, see how great? So here's what I want you to think about. Based on what we read in Genesis 14 and what we read in Psalm 110, we don't have much, so commentators love, whether ancient or modern, to say, well, let me tell you what, notice this. He doesn't have a father and mother. He doesn't have a beginning of days or an end of days, and they begin to build on that. Now think about this. All we know is that after the battle, here he comes. He walks up. Now, it's one thing to say, we've never met this character. We don't know who he is or where he came. Well, it tells us he comes from this area. And just because it doesn't announce that he was the son of this, and this was his mom and dad, and he has a genealogy, oh, and he died in this age. When it doesn't have that, we tend to say, well, we can't just, this guy must be from heaven. Just walked up. I mean, you see that's what we do. It's why my primary focus has become speak where the Bible speaks, be silent where the Bible's silent, call Bible things by Bible names, do Bible things in Bible ways. If we don't know, we have to say we don't know. There's no need to create all these stories, although it's fun. We just don't know. But the writer of Hebrews begins to really develop this figure. See how great? No mom, no dad, no, he doesn't die. You know, and it builds on this idea. And it says, even Avram pays tithes to him. So in a sense, what he's saying, that only Levi serves at the altar. 2 Samuel 6:14, we have David wearing the ephod. He's from Judah. Oh, but that's another class. But what about 2 Samuel 8:18, where it says, and David's sons were priests? But that's another class. We've got some ideas here, but the writer of Hebrews wants to stress nobody from Judah it can't be a priest. But wait a minute, we have another order of priest. So that's the point. That's what they're trying to bring about. In fact, they want to make the point that the writer of Hebrews, that this particular Levitical priesthood was sort of, it was not the intent, right? They want to make this point because it really, now had there been a priesthood, then it would have been all right. But this priesthood, Levi, when he was in the bowels of his father, he was still in the body of Avram, so to speak. Levi, pays tithes to Melchi-Zedek. You see, the point is to make the Melchi-Zedek priesthood the more important, if you will. Now, the text of Psalm 110 is, if I'm not mistaken, is the most oft quoted Hebrew text in all of the Christian literature. I think that's the case. It's quoted quite a bit in various ways, in all or in part. There's this interesting story that I've always actually liked. It's in the book that I'm working on. I'm working on some of this right now. A question is asked of Jesus of Nazareth. You know, he's in the middle of this debate, and he said, Yeshua, Jesus would say, who son is the Messiah? And the answer is David. And he says, why then does he call him Lord? You know, he's talking about Psalm 110. The Lord said unto my Lord. It's a Psalm of David, right? Now, this is interesting. Don't get me wrong. Psalm 110, I've already said, is a very interesting psalm. I'm not just trying to dismiss it and say it's not important. It's very important. It rocked the world, basically, because when we think about this Melchi-Zedek figure, you need to understand that don't just say the Christians went there. You know, like the Christians just didn't understand it, because I told you earlier that in Judaism, many commentators, Rashi, Targum Yonatan, all these guys, all these different commentators just said that Melchi-Zedek is Shem. But that's not the only group, right? The Dead Sea Scrolls, or as the Bible actually calls the Dead Sea, that's a name that came up from the church fathers. They called it the Dead Sea. What do the biblical writers call it? The Sea of Salt, called the Salt Sea Scrolls. Salt Sea Scrolls is more biblically oriented. But anyway, so in the Salt Sea Scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls, Cave 11, there's a document that's called, it's from Cave 11, 11Q Melch, 11Q13. And the scholars call this particular scroll, you can find these online. You can get the book. Gaze of Vermish is the one that I like, the Dead Sea Scrolls. This particular psalm is titled by the translator, The Heavenly Prince, Melchi-Zedek. The Heavenly Prince. We're talking about a document that's 1st century BCE. This is before Christianity. And it's sort of an eschatological midrash. It's looking at the end of days. In fact, there's this interesting conversation in the scroll. They're talking about a number of jubilees, and they believe that they're approaching the time of the end based upon this biblical messianic eschatological chronology. The end is here. This is what they're writing about. And that it has to do, 11Q Melch, has to do with proclaiming liberty to the captives, the remission of debts, and so forth. And that this figure, Melchi-Zedek, is the head of the sons of heaven. The translator, the scholar who did this work that I'm talking about, places a lot of emphasis on this, and even associates the reading of this figure as Michael, you know, this great heavenly being that's coming. This is where they were going with this. Well, so it's not just a Christian thing. There are Jewish sources, there are Hebrew sources which make much to do of Melchi-Zedek, right? We have in this particular Dead Sea Scroll that Melchi-Zedek presides over the final judgment. But when it comes down to it, what do we really know? I mean, this is where I'm at. And I don't want to be the guy that takes away all the fun. I mean, we can talk about all kind of things that aren't in the Bible, or we can speculate. I like to do that, in fact. You know, especially if I drink just a little bit of wine. You know, it really, really gets fun for me then. But what I'm saying is, though, I like to stick just the facts. What do we know? And by facts, I mean, what is written? What is written? Don't go beyond what is written with any stamp of approval, is all I'm saying. Because when it comes down to it, the narrative in Genesis 14 says little. It says little. While seemingly later interpreters saw this as an opportunity to expand and to say lots. This reading contains much to consider even for modern times. As the modern day descendants of Avram have returned to the land promised to them in whispers and dreams, their neighbors consider them outsiders. The ones who came late, the ones who crossed over. This group of modern day descendants of Avram who've crossed over, once again, they have sought with everything they have to find ways to ease the tension in the area, just like Avram did with Lot. They've even given land. They've given up land promised to them in exchange for peace, just like Avram. But I want to say to the kings of the region, to the kings of the world, kings beware. Kings beware. This Torah portion introduces us to a source of instability in our world today, with fanatical and tyrannical leaders who rule over the lives of others. And I want to close today reading Psalm 2, because I think it's quite prophetic. Why do the nations conspire and the people plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves together, and the rulers take counsel together against Jehovah and his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds asunder and cast their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. Jehovah has them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, I have set my ruler on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree of Jehovah. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned. O rulers of the earth, serve Jehovah with fear, with trembling. Kiss the Son, or he will be angry, and you will perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Happy are all those who take refuge in him. This particular story, I believe, the story of Avram, the story of Melchi-Zedek, the designation Hebrew for this particular people, this epithet that's put on the people, the descendants, the ones who crossed over. These stories still have meaning for us today if we will but open our eyes and look for wonderful things in the Torah. Shabbat Shalom. Now we'll take a few minutes and we'll get set up for our dialogue.
With a V
It's
or
on. I
PH?
think they can hear.
V.
Not sure. Yeah. I think
All
it
right.
is. I don't know how well they can. If they can't hear us good enough, let us know. We'll change it.
Okay, can you hear us? We're going to give them a couple of seconds. We know there's a slight delay, but
They can hear something. I just don't know if they can hear us good.
all right. Let's see. We'll give them a couple of minutes and see if everybody's
got it.
on, and
There's a little-
you can tell. You can tell.
I can see it's working. I just can't tell how good.
Okay, so Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I think those of you who know, you know Dave and Sherry, obviously, you know me, you know Stephen, and you know Chad. I think you met them a couple of weeks ago. So it is great to have you guys back with us. It's really nice because it's one thing if you're alone and you feel like, well, I might be a little bit crazy. When other people show up, you either think you might be crazy too, or maybe we're not all crazy, right? So it makes us feel better when other people show up. So, but I tell you, this particular class, by the way, Shabbat Shalom to everyone. I see United Israel Northeast, the Tylers. I like that. I do too.
Yeah, good job, Dave Tyler.
Before we get into the discussion proper, I wanted to add a couple of sort of maybe make a little bit more emphasis on what I talked about at the opening of my teaching today. In 1944, when United Israel was founded, David, he's basically a journalist, and among his many talents, that's what he was at heart. And so for the United Nations, from its beginnings, he was there. And he wrote in defense of the Jewish state. He wrote on behalf of Israel, and he dedicated his life to bringing about a reconciliation between Israel and Judah. And because he knew that the tribes were scattered throughout all the nations and that someday they would come back because he could read the prophets. Now, one of the things that he did was the main vehicle to reach that group of people was what he called the United Israel Bulletin. And Dave is the only person that I know outside of maybe Tabor and probably Ralph. I don't know, maybe a few others.
But I couldn't keep
Did you
up with him.
So Dave has read every historical copy of the United Israel Bulletin, right? You don't have them memorized maybe, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did.
If you bring up something, I'm probably
You can recall.
Yeah.
tell you what it was about. But that's about it. Yeah.
But
I couldn't find it because
yeah. But this. So what we thought about was, when James asked me, hey, since you're just sitting around all day reading the Bible and stuff, do you think maybe that you could do something for United Israel, like, put out a weekly newsletter? And so I decided yesterday afternoon, I didn't have a lot of time because I got in a car wreck and I had all these other things. Some of you heard about my tough day. But I did have time to put out a small newsletter. And so what I want to do is build that each week to begin to capture. And I have an email address that I'm going to post where you can write and submit things for me to include in the news. It could be, I love your family. And if you have a wedding or, whatever.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Do you have a program that can do like a template?
Oh yeah.
A newsletter,
like a newspaper look.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because I do Publisher. I've got one.
Okay.
It's an old one, but
you and I might have to work together on some of this. But so
we can just plop in the picture, the text, and
Tabor and I signed up for United Israel. We signed up with iContact. It's a mail program. And I want you to go check. If you're on our mailing list and you say, well, I didn't get a newsletter, I want you to go check your spam folder.
Exactly.
Because we got a notice this week. James and I kept saying, nobody's responding. Either we're that poor at putting out a newsletter,
right.
And several people wrote us and said, I found this in my spam. Now we pay money for this service. So go to your spam or your trash folder, make sure it's not there, and let your email program know it's not trash.
How do they do? Because this happened to me with like the nursing home my mother's going to.
Mm-hmm.
They've been sending me updates and things, and
you weren't getting them.
I wasn't getting them, and so I finally spoke to the woman. She said, "Oh, well, check your spam folder." And sure enough, there they were.
Well, if you find it in there, I assume that you don't really think what James and us, that what we say is trash. If you don't, then please say it's not. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. So if you're not presently signed up for our newsletter, go to the website, unitedisrael.org, and sign up. Now, we probably have a good bit to talk about today. And I'm ready to get into it. Melchi-Zedek is one part of it, but this idea of Hebrew, that's another major part of the reading. And I realize that some of my views may not represent the views of everyone, but I have for the longest time noticed in Scripture a polemic against the kings. And so I brought that out today, and some of you may not agree with that, but I think that it's important for us to see that there is this underlying message that kings tend to be associated with problems.
And you have to look at the priest also. You have to look at the priest also to get a full picture of that.
Yep.
Because who's writing the story here? That's kind of where you got to look at from who's the story coming from.
The victors write the history.
That's it.
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying here, and I think I have probably more freedom to say this, is that there seems to be a conflict there.
Yeah.
There seems to be a conflict between the priest and the king.
Yeah. To your point, Dave, if you look at Samuel, if you read the stories, 1st, 2nd Samuel, you have this interesting figure. You talk about an interesting figure. Samuel, is he Levitical? Anybody know? Is he Levitical?
I'd have to guess.
No, he's an Ephraimite, right?
Okay.
Now, Samuel is sleeping in the holy place.
Right.
How do you do that? We have these stories that sort of make us go back and look again. Now, one of the things
the priesthood,
and he's not Levitical, but here's the thing. Samuel has a major problem with this monarchy idea. I mean, he says, he cries out to God. Now, I'm giving you, the reason this is on my mind is I'm preparing for my class for the UI conference. And this is one of the pieces. I'm talking about what God never wanted. So you can kind of put your head around that. And I'm sure I'll create a little bit of an angst when I do this class. But one of the things that comes out is Samuel is really upset. And he says to God, he's praying, and he says, they've rejected me. And the Lord tells him, they didn't reject you. They rejected me from being king over them. Give them what they want.
Yeah.
You want to be a king? You want a king like the nations? Then go ahead. But warn them. Warn them about what this king.
Yep.
Now, what people generally do is, and I'm building up to this, I had not noticed. So here's the beauty of me doing the week by week in this ancient triennial cycle. I make myself, because it's only 24 verses. When I'm doing the annual cycle, it's usually 4 chapters.
Sure.
It's a little bit more time consuming.
Got a lot more material.
One chapter, I can read it in the Hebrew, and you know what as I read it, the first thing that jumped out to me, king, 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 king. Wonder how many times king is used. 28 times in 24 verses.
I know.
Now, when we think about that, that's why I had to incorporate this idea of monarchy into today's class, because the writer wants me to. It's screaming king. Right. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit.
I think it was interesting. You brought up the point how they were so gung-ho and serious about capturing or following, that they went from like the bottom of the Dead Sea all the way up to where Damascus
Yeah,
is, right? And
yeah.
it's like, that's why I love the map idea. It's like, I
Yeah.
couldn't really picture that until I looked on the map and saw that's a lot of,
It's a lot of territory.
yeah, on foot.
Yeah.
To, you know,
Mhm.
you have to be really serious.
Yeah, absolutely. And that terrain, that
Mhm.
terrain, there's some
Mhm.
kind now what Dave and I did, it's funny when we were in Israel, you know, in the desert, one of the things that we did one morning was we took a big map and we brought it out on the picnic table and we oriented it, you know, so we were, you know, in the right orientation. And then we began to read some of these stories.
Awesome.
And Dave's like, okay, so you know, he's
over there.
This is right there. And here's the fun part about being in Israel when you're looking at it, we're in the area where these patriarchs are.
Yeah, I could picture like when it said, and they fled, you know, what, to the mountains to the east or whatever.
Yep.
It's like
we look over there and see the
it's
mountains.
like, oh, I know where I can see that. I remember that's the.
Yeah, and it's amazing because all of these regions, like for instance, where it talks about Hazazon Tamar, now Hazazon Tamar is considered to be En Gedi.
Yeah.
So we know where En Gedi is, right? And when you think, but that's not just a hop, skip, and a jump from Kadesh.
No,
I mean,
that's like an hour.
Yeah. So you're talking, and on foot, yeah. So anyway, I think what people, I really did get the impression this time when I read it, that what we were dealing with is an ancient world war. I mean, all the kings are there. You know, they're fighting. They're engaged in battle. And by the way, one thing I didn't bring up, guess how many times the word milchama, war or battle, guess how many times that occurs in Genesis? Twice. And guess where they are? Genesis 14.
Wow.
You know, it never talks about.
So this is the war chapter.
This is the chapter on war. Now, here's something else that I saw in my reading that I didn't put in. You can only put so much in a class, right? We have this passage in Exodus 17:16. Let me look at it in Hebrew. Exodus 17:16 is an interesting passage, and I want to read it because it's generally translated poorly. It's Vayomer ki yad alkes ya milchama la'Adonai ba'amalek midor dor. And he said, because a hand is upon the throne of Yah, or against the throne of Yah, war, milchama, that's our word, battle, to Jehovah with Amalek from generation of a generation. So the idea is that there's the throne of Yah. This is the kingdom of God. This is my interpretation.
Okay.
Because there's a hand against that throne, there's going to be an eternal struggle between Jehovah and Amalek. And this is indicative, and it's throughout the text. Now, what I find interesting is that before Amalek is a descendant that doesn't come until later. He's a descendant, right, of who? Esau. But we don't have him yet.
Right.
But the Amalekites are mentioned in this Torah reading. It talks about the whole land of the Amalekites. And you go, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, James brought that up.
Yeah.
What did he call it?
Anachronistic.
Yeah, an anachronistic
Yeah.
that it is sometimes added later because, like, to give you reference.
Yeah.
Like what it is now.
Yeah. So when this story, Genesis 14, was written down, it's not written as we don't have the newspaper article that was published in the Jerusalem Post when Abram was fighting the kings and all. What we have is a later writer, if it's Moses, if it's a scribe, whatever, a Levite, however you get the Bible that we have.
They filled in some blanks there.
They said, you know, Sherry,
Clear.
we're talking about the land of the Amalekites.
Right.
And the modern reader at that time, the contemporary reader goes, oh, yeah, oh, okay. It's like when you read, and this is this is Bethlehem. It was called Luz at the first. You're like, oh, okay.
I know this is how, when I find these passages, like names I don't recognize, I'll Google.
Yeah.
What is, where is this today? You know, and it'll answer.
Yeah. So it's, so what we have though is in this account, we have this great battle that takes place. Avram, who is, he's 70s, 80s. I mean, he's an older gentleman, right? And he gets word that Lot has been taken captive. He's sitting under his tree.
Yeah, that wording, especially in the transparent thing, had me a little confused who that was talking about, because it was like the way it's put.
How's it say?
An escaper came, and he told to Abram the Hebrew, and he was dwelling by the oaks of Mamre. So, I guess.
Yeah, it's Avram, and we know that because in chapter 13, verse 18, in last week's class, it's like in this episode, our hero is sitting under the oaks. He's always sitting under the tree. He's just chilling.
And then, that's near Hebron.
Yes, right? Yes. So he's actually, the land that he's in belongs to these Amorite brothers, Mamre, Eshcol, and Aner. Now Avram has formed a confederate with these guys. I picture them when Dave and I were in Israel. We went to Muhammad's tent, right? And Muhammad and his little daughters, 5 and 6 years old, brought us tea, and we ate chocolate cookies in there. Yeah, king cake. Yeah, king cake. No, it wasn't king cake. But they brought us tea.
Girl Scout cookies.
Girl Scout cookies. Yeah. But they sat there quiet. It was one of the most moving things. We're in a tent. We're in a Bedouin tent. And they rolled out their pads, and Dave just, he flops down on one.
Most comfortable I've been the whole trip.
Yeah, because we've been working.
Lay on the desert floor. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So we sit down, and one of the things that we did was I would imagine what it was like in the ancient world, and it's not much different. When we left that afternoon, we're driving in our little mule back across the desert, back to our place from his place, and we pass a shepherdess, and she's walking in front of a herd of sheep.
Yeah, you took a picture.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah, that was cool.
I mean, and it looks just like the ancient world.
Yeah.
Things haven't changed a lot.
What they do.
Ross, I have a question to ask. If you would expound on this a little bit.
Because our viewers are all eating. They're all eating. They're not typing.
Oh, okay.
When you talked about Melchi-Zedek, you said that he was a priest without an altar and requiring no blood. And my question is, how do you know that? Just because it doesn't say?
Absolutely. I did what everybody else does. I did exactly what the rest of the world did there. What I wanted to do was make that exact point. Here's
see if everybody's paying attention. That's what it was.
Yeah, that's right. I'm so glad you brought that up, because what we have, it does say this. It said he was priest of El Elyon.
Yeah.
And then it adds because now, so in other words, here's what I read, and I'm not trying to read more into it than what's there, but I can extrapolate this. It says he was priest of Most High God because, what does it say? He brought bread and wine, and he did a blessing, which pretty much says the reason he's a priest is he's got bread and wine, and he's bringing a blessing. What we don't get there, it could have said because he had an altar, and so forth and so on. Now, what I wanted people to do, because I spent a lot of time working through this idea that Hebrews and the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Salt Sea Scrolls, what they do is they go, oh, I got a gap. Well, let me add this. Let me add that. Let me add this. And they do that. So I did my own version. What we have, though, is the first time a priest is mentioned, there's no mention of anything but bread, wine, and blessing. And I like that. Now, what we find though is that it's to me it's interesting, to your point earlier, Dave, that in one text, the very first time that we meet with king, we meet with priest.
Mm.
And we get a picture of both. Kings are at war, priests are bringing blessings.
Wow.
It says to me that the writer, let's say that it's inspired text. Let's say that somehow, some way, our Creator wants to give us a message about, look at this, pay attention. Remember, I told you, this text is so different that what people begin to do is say, someone else wrote this. It doesn't fit with the rest of the story. This is where they come to with it. Because like I said, you have Avram at the end of chapter 13 in the 8th lesson that I taught. Avram is sitting in the under the oaks. He's a peaceful inhabitant of the land. And almost, if you did a play, like if you hired a great a play director, I can imagine on the stage the lights go down. Avram is reclined like in the Bedouin tent. He's sitting there. He's got this beautiful white hair and beard like me. And the lights go down, and then it's very, very dark. And you give a few minutes while they're moving things around, and then lights come back up, and cymbals are crashing, and kings are riding against one another, and their swords thrashing. And you see, it's so different. We read through it and we go, and it was in the days of Amraphel, and this king made war with it. What? It's world war. It's war. Yeah. We've never heard of war. We've never heard of a king. What's a king? King in war, king in war, king. You
gotta have a king if you're gonna have a war.
Evidently. Now,
what are they warring over? Power.
It says land, this one group was tired of being ruled over by another, and they rebelled. In this year, they rebelled. Now, what happens is whenever you lord over another group, at some point they get fed the hell up.
Sure.
As I get older, even then, as I get older, I think if you said, what do you love? The idea that I love the most is freedom. I love freedom. I mean, I'm okay with you having your freedom. Don't take mine. I'm in love with my freedom. I like to do what I like to do, and I don't want you to tell me I can't do it. Now, I like rules. I do like the rule of law, but I love freedom.
Yeah.
And whenever one group lords over another group, people tend to fight that.
And also, the idea that, so you got this king and he got these people, and for the king to be king, the people got to be somewhat happy. They got to be
willing to submit.
But at some point, they're not going to be as happy anymore. So usually what happens is they have a war somewhere. They'll invent an enemy somewhere and have a war, and they forget about all their other stuff. That's kind of, that's going on right now, in fact.
Yeah. This story pictures that, gives us that first biblical picture of what happens when one group confederates with another, when kings come together to fight a common enemy, as you call it. And it really does stand out in the text. I mean, think about it. You can go back through. We have the creation. We have these generations. We have the Tower of Babel. We have issues, domestic type issues. We have the division of the people. We have migrations of certain groups, but we've not until this week encountered nation fighting against nation.
Right.
And the only reason that Avram is engaged in this, he's already made peace with his neighbors. The only reason he's engaged is because they picked on him. Otherwise, he would have stayed out of it, I presume. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that, but he doesn't get engaged until his own family is affected. So I did play a little bit in my interpretive mode. today a little bit because I felt inspired as I read this. I saw a connection, if you will, between Avram and the modern day descendants of Israel. He is dwelling peaceably, undisturbed, and not disturbing until
sitting under his tree.
And Annie's made peace with the neighbors.
Well, one thing in the translation here, the transparent translation, it would seem that Abram already knew war because of this verse in 14 where he says he heard, heard that his brother was taken captive, and he emptied his trained ones and brought forth his house. So that sounds like he's got an army already trained.
Yeah. And based on that, people will sometimes, let me pull this up. Sometimes they'll think of this story as pointing to Avram as somewhat of a warlord, right? Which is a different picture than we've had of him. But let's see, Genesis 14:14.
So he had an army. He had to have people making spears.
He had 318.
Well, but let's look though. It does say trained ones, but do we know that they were trained for war?
Yeah, because
Go ahead.
it could be experienced or dedicated.
Just a thought. I'm not saying
No.
I have any historical
That's what we're doing
backing,
here.
but
Oh, I don't know either.
even though we're saying that we have kings and we have armies now, I tend to think that the world that they lived in, though, was a dangerous place.
Oh, yeah.
Where they may not have kings and armies as we have that concept. Sure. Any man that was going to be out on the land better be able to fight, because
and then you got
somebody's going to attack him.
And you got to have somebody stay awake at night and guard the place while you sleep, or you're not going to get much sleep. It's tough.
Let's give you a little bit more on that word. It says trained. If you look up the root word chanik, it does mean trained, tried, experienced. But another thing that it means, it's tied to another word that we know. Have you ever heard of the word Hanukkah? All right. Hanukkah is from the same root. And Hanukkah and Chanak, Het, Nun, Kaf, actually is a word that means dedicated. So I don't know, and James knows Hebrew far greater than I, but whenever you think about this idea, it could mean, we think trained for war, like Avram's got this army trained. I don't see it, and I don't think he's implying that.
He's got both, dedicated and
okay, so he pulls that in his note.
Yeah.
So dedicated and experienced, I like that, because what we have this idea that he's got some very dedicated ones. Now, who are his dedicated ones? Interestingly enough, 3 of them happen to be Amorites. Now, it says he has 318. Now, the rabbis who are trying to think through this too, right? They really tear these texts up. They go, 318, he's got a big army. I mean, because they're trying to think, does this fit the picture? What they did was they said, what's interesting? I'm not saying that this is right, wrong. I'm just showing you an interpretive method. They said, when I see 318, they actually came up with this comment in their commentaries. Eliezer is the servant. His name, the gematria of his name is 318. So what they said was, this is talking about Avram, in a deep sense, bringing his servants with him.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like a militia, as much as it is. Can you imagine? God forbid. I have a family that's growing. All right, and so I have my kids and their kids, and it's starting to build. It's not 318 yet, but if one of mine were taken. And I called them all up. I've got a doctor, an actor, people that work at restaurants. I got a cop. I got and I called everybody and I said, hey, we got to go get so-and-so.
Yeah.
All right, we'll be there. You know, I view it as his household, his expanded household, including his servants, his maidservants, that kind of thing. I don't see him marching lockstep and, you know, practicing like Hezbollah or you know, anything like that.
No,
So,
but they would probably follow orders instantly, like direction.
And they would
I'm
do that.
knowing this because I think I told you this. I started watching this series called Vikings, and it's really gruesome, but it's all about this war and all of this stuff going on. That's
what he was
really
saying.
hard
And
to,
I think
but I
it's the
want to
loyal-
understand
the
the
loyal
thinking.
ones.
Yeah,
to
yeah.
Avram.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi,
I'm just curious.
Come on.
Well, you're
Come on
welcome.
in.
Come on in.
we're discussing. We're
I'm
discussing.
Ross. I like curious people.
But I think that leads up to your
We're just
point.
having a
They,
discussion
John.
here. We're talking. I taught a class on the Bible.
John Kane,
So have a seat if you'd like.
it would have to be quick. I
Okay.
go antique shopping.
Well, if
It's
you're
my
antique,
penance.
you're what?
It's my penance for hunting season.
Oh, oh, you're just trying to get away from shopping. Let me give you a card, so if you do have to leave, you got that.
There you go.
So, but we did a study this morning on Genesis chapter 14, and we're just working through the story of Abraham, and he's Avram at the time, Abram. And so we're talking about the battle that takes place in Genesis chapter 14. So, but we do a live webcast every Saturday, and I teach a class, and then after I teach a class, we come and sit down and we discuss what we just read. We do have food, by the way.
We have lunch.
I just had a
You don't-
big breakfast.
You just snuck out a little bit. You don't have that much time. So, but anyway,
we just have to give him some antiques so he can take home with him.
yeah, that's right. That's right.
There's some interesting antiques here too.
It is a great place for antique shopping if you like that kind of thing, or if you.
I grew up in it. My
Oh,
mom, my grandmother's an interior decorator
Mm.
from Lafayette. My mom,
There you
my
go.
2 sisters.
Okay.
I've hung more pictures.
That-
Like all the men.
Are you up here?
Are you up here by yourself?
Huh?
Or is somebody with you, or are you up here by
No,
yourself?
I'm picking up my friend,
Oh, okay.
Okay.
my almost wife.
Okay.
Yeah,
I got you.
fantastic.
I got you. Well, we all understand those days, those shopping days. But yeah, it's you know, when you think about this particular story, you do get a different picture of Abram. And the fun thing about working through these, going through a chapter at a time, is that you do have a chance to really dig in.
Mhm.
And as we pointed out, quite often, whenever we're introduced to someone like Melchi-Zedek, or as I called him as a kid, Melchi-Zedek,
Yeah.
you do come away with questions. Who is this? I mean, he just shows up. He's just, what's
Yeah.
the story behind that? So then we have stories that are written later in both the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have stories, Josephus talks about it, the first century historian. We have the Christian New Testament talks about it. So it really, it's just an amazing opportunity for people to begin to ponder, what is this? You know, who is this person? So one of the things that I like to do is prepare for each week's class to think about what's coming. So when we move into next week, we're going to be in chapter 15. And in chapter 15, once again, God appears to Abram. And once again, we have this communication from God to Abram, and it opens up an entirely new dialogue. Now, I think what's interesting, we in the modern day think that they walked around and every morning God spoke to them. Chad, good morning. John, good morning. This is the Lord speaking. But what really happens is
It only lasted a week.
and then it might be years before they communicated again.
And then it's usually in visions or dreams. It's
It
not
is,
like
yeah.
mouth to mouth.
Because it
Yeah.
says, you know, they went somewhere. You know, we think, oh, they just got the car, drove off. I mean, they just traveled over and they got there that evening.
Yep,
No, we talking, you know, years maybe. Walk.
That's right.
You know, they're walking.
that's
with
right.
with their animals and
And we've been to this terrain.
yeah,
And this
it's not
terrain,
easy.
you don't
Not
just
easy.
get there from here.
You know, go to that little mountain and walk over there. You're tired by the time you get there.
That's
You're ready
right.
to go sleep.
So the recap
Wore out.
of this teaching,
Sand's hard to walk on. Yeah, it's
to
tough.
think about these kings, and this is the first time war is mentioned
Mhm.
in the Bible, and how they really went all out, and they went from the bottom of the land to the top
Yeah.
in pursuit of their enemies, and that they rejected God as their king.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So I guess it's just, and then I guess next week we'll go into more of Abram's relationship with God, how he's to trust in him and follow him and everything. But yeah, this is really interesting.
Well, so today I focused on king because in one chapter
Sure.
it's mentioned 28 times. You
20,
can't,
24 verses.
24 verses, the word king
King
shows up 28
28
times. We have to
times.
talk about kings. Here's the thing. The only time in Genesis that war is mentioned is Genesis 14. Of
Mhm.
all, because we're encountering the children of Israel as they come out, they're meeting, the patriarchs are meeting world leaders. We have Abimelech, we have the kings of all these different rulers and so forth. But this is the only time war is really mentioned here.
Mhm.
The interesting thing to me, though, is as we work through this, what we begin to see is that this interaction with the nations around them, it does have a bearing on our modern understanding of what's going on. And that's why I brought that up the way that I did today. I've been to Israel several times, as you know, and one of the things that you see is that just like Avram, who was willing to give land for peace, we see the same thing in the modern
Sure.
era. Now, I'm pretty much a Zionist. I'm a Zionist at heart. I'm saying, hey, God gave you the land, don't give them an inch. But here's the thing: the promise that comes to Avram and later Abraham, when his name is changed, is that you will get it. The whole thing belongs to you, but in the meantime, he's got to deal with the present reality. And so what we see is that ultimately the prophets of Israel looked forward to a time, as it's described in Isaiah 2 and Micah 4, when nation will not lift up sword against nation, when they will take their spears and their swords and turn them into plowshares and pruning hooks. And there will be war no more. That's the goal. That's the beautiful vision.
And they don't have a king, right?
I mean, they have a king.
They have a king, but it's not
it's
not a man.
Jehovah. It's God. It's the creator. He once again is king.
So you got the
Zechariah
priest, you got
14:9.
the kings, the priests, and then you got the prophets.
Yep.
Well, I guess I should have put it in the proper order. Prophets.
Yeah. You have an unfolding. It's a revelatory message that Israel will ultimately live up to its purpose. Remember the call of Abraham. It puts it this way: Genesis 12, and I will. He says, "I will make your name great." Basically, right? Mm-hmm. He says, "I'll make you a great nation, a goy gadol, a great nation. I'll make your name great. I will bless you, and you be a blessing." And then it says, "And I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who esteem you lightly. And in you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed." Ultimately, world peace, as we say, comes through the agency of one man's family. We can talk, you get into the Messiah, you get in all these other subjects in the study of end times things. But ultimately, the responsibility belongs and goes back to this initial call. And so Abraham really is the sort of the basis for this faith. Because remember, we started with Adam. We saw what happened with Adam and how they're exiled. We get into the descendants of Adam. We follow that through, and then it reaches such a bad place that Noah and his family are the only ones saved. Then you go from Noah and you go, that's 10 generations in, it goes bad again. And then God calls Abraham. The thing that I like to point out, though, is that there's a clue that runs through the scripture. What do we know about Noah? It says that he walked with God. What do we know? Enoch in Genesis
Mhm.
5:24, and he walked with God. Genesis 6, Noah, verse 9. Noah was a righteous man, whole in his generations, and he walked with God. Then we get to Abram, and it says about Abram, it says, walk before me and be complete.
Going further back, I mean, I just got,
Yeah.
Abraham, Adam in the cool of the evening walked with God.
That's right.
You know, so
No, that's a good
there's
point. Don't leave that out. That's right. So the goal then, according to the Bible, seems to be how do you define this walk? And that's our quest. You know, this week, speaking of walking, since I don't get it, I'm spending time in front of the computer all day. I parked my car and I started walking to the bank.
There you go.
And I I've seen him around, and
Yeah,
I said,
I've seen him walk
he's,
by.
yeah, he's got this long white beard and he's got a hat. And I'm thinking, I wonder what his story is.
Yeah, I've seen him in Audubon Market.
Yeah, I thought he was a Greek Orthodox, but he quickly
Well, I
straightened
thought
me
too.
out. He said, no, I'm Russian Orthodox. We're the right church. You know, it's like, don't call what them fighting words.
Who's your king?
Yeah. But it was a fun discussion.
Yeah. You get to meet people
Theologically.
doing that. Yeah.
And here's the thing, people will sometimes meet me, and if you sit at a table like we are, and you have 5, 6, 7, 10 people, 50 people, 100 people, or 2 people, you're going to find reasons to disagree theologically.
Yeah.
You know, churches, synagogues, religious groups split over meetings that can't decide on what color carpet to put. That's why we don't have carpet now. But there is that. But what if people could come together, which, by the way, this is kind of what we do, wherever you're at, whatever you believe, let's start on common ground. So when I met this gentleman right there on the road, I could tell right away that theologically we might be worlds apart.
Right. Usually our common ground is what kind of coffee we drink. Usually. I mean,
But
it's just,
we had some common points. We're both white-headed, you know. He had a hat. I didn't have a hat. You know, you could pick differences apart. But what I found was that, hey, this guy, I told him, I said, look, I'm here almost every day. Come in, I'll make you a pot of coffee. We need to remind me.
He's got his little place. He's sitting over there. He's got his little place too.
Yeah, evidently.
Okay, so can I ask you a quick question
Yep.
about the king of Sodom?
Yep.
Okay.
He's Canaanite. He's not. Why does Abram want to take any money?
Call me.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, no.
Hey,
I gotta
nice
go
to
pick
meet
up
you.
my Eve.
Yeah.
I hear you. Hey, good deal. Nice to
Nice
meet
to
you.
meet
Come
you.
see me anytime.
I will. I'll certainly do that.
Why? Okay, won't he take any? Doesn't want to get any money, wealth from the king of Sodom? Is it because he is not a friend of Jehovah? What's the deal there?
We don't know a lot of detail as to why he doesn't in relation to the king. I think
Mhm.
it's not because of the person.
Okay.
I think it's that he says, I don't want anyone, I'm
That's
paraphrasing,
Mhm.
to say they made me rich. For
Okay.
instance,
He
then
knew where his
would be
blessings
in,
were coming from.
that's
what it
right.
is.
That's right.
That's
He
basically-
would then be indebted
Right.
because the king of he's in
That-
this area. The
that
king
no
would
one's-
go, hey, I made you rich. You
Yeah.
now owe me.
Yeah.
Or-
yeah.
Or other people saying, well, I know how he got, I know
Yep.
how he's blessed.
Yeah. That
In
makes
In other
sense.
words,
I mean, that was my thinking too. I just
Is your
wondered.
chat still working? Mine shows
Uh-oh.
disconnected, but I don't know.
I'm
if-
still up, but
No, mine's
it's
still
not
up.
very active.
That's okay. People are just amazed.
They're sitting there with their mouth open. Going,
Yeah.
I don't know what to say
So
about
for
all
those of you who are still with us, this gentleman you heard, he's just out antique shopping with
Yeah.
his girlfriend or whatever. And he's like, I got to get away from that. So I'll just stumble
So he's-
into this
Well,
Bible
I'm
Go to
study.
church.
curious about what is this United Israel? What's that about?
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
But the point I was going to make about Amalek a little while ago is that even though Amalek is not introduced in our story yet,
Mhm.
I find it
The
intriguing.
person. Yeah.
I find it intriguing that when we have battle, Milcomah, it's the reason I read Exodus 17:16, Amalek in a way is mentioned.
Yeah.
This is the land of the Amalekites. It wants to, in my mind, it associates Amalek, kings, battle, and it kind of puts it all there like Tyler says Amalek is a bad vibe, right? You know, we have this image in Exodus 17. We also the thing about Amalek, it's also mentioned in Deuteronomy. Amalek attacks Israel from the rear and tackles and assaults the weak,
or young,
the young, the old, the feeble. This is a dirty group. They fight dirty. And so what we have is we have this introduction to Amalek in this story of a growing bad and unrest in the region, if you will.
Annette had a question for you.
Okay. Yeah, my chat's not working, so.
she's we're waiting
There's
for
a
the question.
comment regarding Salem/Shalem. I believe this place is connected to Shechem, not Jerusalem. So I guess Salem.
So I have
She's
never
talking
read that. I have not read that there's a connection between Shalem mentioned here and Shechem. But it's the reason that, or the way that I learn is when someone challenges. What I would do is say, and Annette may know this, and she may have this reference for me, or some way that she sees this, because I'm interested. I like to look at a map when I map things out and kind of see where things are going on. So, for instance, I had in my notes last night, as I was tracing this, all the references and what most make of these places. Now, here's the other thing. We don't know for certain where some of these places are. We really don't. So it could very well be that Annette has found something that associates it with Shechem.
Yeah. So Annette, if you have.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely interested. Definitely interested. So the idea, though, as you pointed out, Sherry, is that this battle, as it's presented, goes from north to, it covers the entirety of the land, basically.
They're serious.
One of the viewers wants to know about the tithe thing. It's kind of a scattered question.
The 10%.
Abram gave him 10%. This sounds like a tithe.
It is absolutely a tithe. And in Genesis, we meet, so send all your checks to God, make them out to Ross. No, it's actually what we'll notice, though, is that whenever it mentions tithe here, or tenth, that is exactly what that is. This is a very, very ancient practice, and it was a way to set aside for God, if you will, a tenth. A portion, and it is a tenth, and it's pretty easy to do the math on.
Yeah.
It's like if you get $10, you set aside $1, and people say, "Oh, it wasn't anything to do with money." Well, here in Genesis 14, what we meet with, Avram is not, I don't think, dealing with fruits and vegetables here. He's dealing with a tenth of everything that came to him.
So the idea is that here's where I kind of got confused. Was about they're having war and there's spoils of war, and the context is how do we distribute this stuff. So this priest person comes along. What is he bringing with him to give? What?
Yeah,
it's a blessing.
Yeah, I don't know, but so the idea, though, is that whatever the properties are when they split it up, and you're right, was he part of the war? Did he have
right?
But the idea of a tithe in this sense, it doesn't describe what he gave.
I got you.
But we also have a passage in Genesis chapter 28 where Jacob has a dream of the sulam, of the ladder.
Yeah.
And when he wakes up and realizes, he said, "I did not know it, but God is in this place. How awesome is this place?" It says that if you bring me, he tells God, "If you bring me back to this place, and you'll be my God, and I will give a tenth of everything to you." So what we call in Hebrew the maaser, the tenth, there is a biblical principle that requires, or at least it's established as a practice, to give a tenth of everything that comes to us to God. Now, I never talk about money and ministry so much, but there is a precedent set for people to set aside 1/10 of what they have to go towards God. Now, so if someone is in a church and they say, well, I want to give 1/10, I get that. But what I advise people who ask me about this is it is important, if you will, to take 1/10. Have you ever heard somebody go, do you take it off the net or the gross? And the preacher who's sitting, he says, what do you want to be blessed on? You want to be blessed on the gross or the net? Meaning you'd give me mine before you take even taxes out. Okay, well, that's crazy. Here's the idea. Whatever goes into your existence, if you can take, this is my idea of a tithe, if you can take 1/10 of that and you can set it aside, some people even set up a different bank account.
Sure.
And someone, like, it's not just money, but also crops, gold, silver, whatever. So if you take 1/10, I'm not saying you write the check to the First Baptist Church of Jerusalem or to United Israel or whatever. You might take that 1/10 and you might find a needy family member. And you might say, my aunt so-and-so is destitute. I'm going to give her, let's say I have $100 and I'm going to give 50 of it here, or I want to give a certain amount to the poor and needy. I was talking to the Tylers.
Maybe even use it to go on a trip or something.
Well, what about?
They did use it for that, for the
somebody
festivals.
Says Sukkot. So is that biblical?
Yeah, there are three tithes.
Maybe go on a tour. I'm just saying.
Yeah, the Bible sets aside 3 tithes actually, so it's really more than just 1/10. But there were tithes that were used to fund the widows and orphans, in the 3rd year. You can get into this, and we should probably do a teaching on this.
Time is money.
Yep. Yep. But one of the things that we can do is take. That's an excellent example. If you have, everybody has the same amount of time, 24 hours every day. So how many hours a day should I set aside for, let's say, biblical study or Hebrew study or whatever? In our busy world, you don't have any more time than I do. What do? You do the math. What is that? 2.4 hours, right? All right. So
leap years, sometimes
2 hours and 20 minutes, maybe you should set aside every day. I don't know. Maybe, you say it a lot. Well, but here's the thing. People are like, well, I listen to you ramble on I get my whole week's worth right here on Saturday morning. There you go.
Does it count if we just listen to your pods overnight? Like, today I'm going to listen to it again.
Yeah. I'm going to chalk it up, get my bank account. But so anyway, I think that it is interesting that a large majority of religious groups who say that the law is done away with, they do keep that. They're like, well, the tithe still matters. You're like, well, wait a minute. None of this other stuff.
You got to bring it in the storehouse, man. You got to get the storehouse.
Yeah, but what you're saying by principle, by Torah principle, it makes sense.
It does.
Bigger barns here. I tell you what.
It is. Especially if you're not a wealthy person.
Yeah,
I've been there, done that too many times.
That if I'm taking, a portion of what I have to give to others, to help others, to do whatever with, that takes faith. So that does make sense.
Yeah, and I do like the ideas in the patriarchs. Whenever we look at Genesis 28 and Genesis 14, when the tithe is mentioned, it is interesting how that tithe seems to play. And it's mentioned, and it's not bringing stuff to the priest. See, a lot of people will go, well, you have to bring your produce to the priest. That's what a tithe is. Well, that's part of what a tithe is. But it really, at its root meaning, it's 1/10 of what you have. And I like to think about it like not only money, but also time, your resource, anything that you have. The idea is that you set apart some of it and mark it as holy. Now, I've had, Dave Tyler and I talked last night, and he was talking about, they have a wonderful organization that they use to help others. Look, that's what we encourage people to do at United Israel is how do you help the ones in need? That's what we're saying. That's what a tithe is. But
to be able to do something besides say I'm going to pray for you. I mean, that's important. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I mean, to be able to do some other functions.
Yeah.
If you see a need.
Remember,
come up to you.
exactly. Remember, Abram, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make your name great. You're going to be a great nation. Be a blessing, Abram.
Right.
Be a blessing. And if you're a blessing, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who esteem you lightly, and in you all the nations of the earth.
It's contagious.
It is. Blessing brings blessing.
Yeah.
And we should, and I'm not talking money here. I'm off that. But we should never think that our blessings are only so that we can say, hallelujah, I'm blessed. Our blessings are so that we have the means and the heart to bless others.
Sure.
It's about, Abram learns this lesson. Blessings are coming to you for one reason, that ultimately all the families of the earth will be blessed. Blessing brings blessing. It's contagious. So it's been, it's a wonderful Shabbat here. I know that not everyone is blessed with the beautiful weather we have here.
And the sun's out, so
It
we're happy
is
about
lovely. But I'm excited about these narratives that we're working through. Genesis 15. I already know some of the things that we're going to talk about next week. I encourage people to join us again next week. Stephen, I appreciate you guys driving. I know you two drive all the way from Pride every week. So
Yeah.
you're sacrificing to come here, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate people's time. You guys might want to tell stories. I mean, I don't have to go anywhere, but you were telling me earlier, you're meeting people, and you guys have stories of meeting people who are kind of waking up. I don't know if you guys want to get into that. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but
You want to? Oh,
I want to hear.
well, I think part of it too is just being able to relate the basics of the Abrahamic faith or the Torah faith. I mean, and that's part of like what I just wanted to see if John had any quick questions or where he was
saw you go out there.
where he was coming from.
What'd you learn?
Oh, I learned a lot. Well,
Why did he walk through that door?
I mean, the fact that he walked through the door out
Looking
of
for antiques.
curiosity of the sign.
I think maybe there was an antique shop here before.
Yeah, there was.
There was.
Okay.
We have old things in here. They're not for sale though.
Right.
But
I mean, do you want to talk about a Torah scroll?
Yeah. What? So what did he say? He actually thought this might be an antique shop.
Well, he knew this had been an antique shop, so he was coming back here. So you may occasionally have people walk in that are looking for antiques. And
Yeah.
all you got to do is say, I got the most antique thing
That's
you could
right.
ever want.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
mean, it's the ancient.
I got the ancient
is here.
hats, baby.
I mean, it's not 100 years old. It's a little older than that.
That's right.
So I think it's just being able to share the basics of faith and it not be where so many of us have had others come across to us from a perspective of, I've got to sit here and give you the truth without even knowing where you're coming from.
Yeah. What is because I'm sort of in a different place. A lot of people, I think, they don't know what I am, but they know I ain't what they are. And so there's a little anxiety about meeting me or talking with me. But you guys are, in a way, you have other people that you're meeting. Erin is a good example. Erin is always meeting people that she knows through homeschool groups or through previous engagements in religious groups. And they're always asking questions like, what are you doing now? Where are you at? I don't see you at church anymore, so-and-so, or what? Is that happening out there? And I just don't see it. I mean,
Well, for me, I haven't really separated myself that much because I'm still going to church on Sunday mornings
Yeah,
and things like
yeah.
that. So, this is on video, so but
Yeah.
a lot of people don't know where I'm coming from. But I did have a few times that I've mentioned certain things, and then like I was having dinner with some friends last night who actually only been back from, they're actually missionaries in Africa. They were there for 5 or 6 years, and just kind of, I guess, disappointed in what they're seeing in the churches today, and then have a lot of questions. And so they kind of asked me, I mentioned, I was studying Judaism just because that's the only thing they would understand. I wouldn't be able to go into deep.
Yeah.
I just mentioned to a friend of mine, a year ago that I was kind of studying that, and so he asked me last night, he said, so you've been still studying that? And I was like, yeah, and I was like, but I promise you really don't want to get into this right now over dinner, He's like, his wife's like, no, we really do. And so I started just kind of saying a few things, and then kind of the conversation kind of got into great detail.
Were you scared at first? Like, I'm gonna blow this?
No, I wasn't scared. I just didn't want them to, think, of course we all have this, I don't want to say, hey, this guy's crazy, and then not only that, I didn't want to, again, I'm still not out in the open with it all right now. So, and I don't want to do anything that's going to affect my wife's relationships and things like that. So there's some, I'm traveling on, light ground right now.
Yeah.
But
walking circumspectly.
Right. But his wife just asked me, said, what got you, what started this whole process? And then I went through the whole Paul thing, and she's like, I've had that same question. She said, I've asked that before, but you asked that, and people's like, no, don't say, really.
Don't blaspheme.
Right.
That's blasphemy just to even raise the question.
You don't have the Holy Spirit or something.
And no,
because he's an apostle.
Right. And and she said, I've had that same question. I've asked it. She said, every time I do that, it's like, oh, you don't want to ask those questions. You don't want just, you just got, it's in there. You just believe it.
Don't go there.
Right. Don't go there. And she even said, like, she was very interested in everything. I mean, asking all these questions, and then her husband the same way. And to the point to where they were really receptive to everything I was saying. And I'm going to tell you, I was really passionate about. I mean, it was like my wife's probably going, "What in the world?" Because I do get passionate about things, and when if I'm like right now, I'm pretty uncomfortable about this, because I'm new here. So but when I'm my element, I'm very
You're
very
more
passionate.
confident then.
When I'm in my element, I'm pretty passionate about certain things when I believe it. Yeah. And so that was really coming across last night, and I felt like, man, I'm yelling almost in this place, but I was loud where I was eating. And we ended up talking for about 3 hours in a restaurant about and having all these questions. And my wife was sitting there, and she was even saying, it was a struggle for her, and still is, and and just trying to come to grips with what I'm learning. So I still don't have all the terminology. I'm still new in all this. I still don't have all the terminology, even the things, even the terminology you guys use, and I'm still having I don't have all that terminology. I'm still, I have that New Testament terminology down, but what I'm learning now is it's I don't have all the answers, and I told them that. But my point in saying it was like, it was very encouraging to see that somebody was actually having those same questions and really receptive to everything, to the point to where they want to come meet with you, and I'm gonna give them the book Abrahamic Faith and all that. And they want, matter of fact, she looked it online, like she's like, I'm gonna get that book right now. And she's looking, and it was like $69. I said, I'm gonna get you one. Don't worry,
get her one for free.
Yeah. So,
well,
she'll really value it then. Maybe give it to her. It's like, man,
we pay people to take it.
Yeah.
I mean, you had told me this, or you had told all us this before. You did let them know that you are 100%, without a doubt, confident that God is real. His name is Jehovah, and he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah, that's why I started out. Like I said, this is gonna be a great revelation to you, probably, but
but that's the starting point.
That's where it started. I said, the one thing I can tell you for certain is that. And not only that, because again, in this whole process,
so powerful.
This whole process of research, and I think a lot of people are seeing are disappointed with religion today, as far as
it's the old thing. They're hungry.
And
they're hungry.
It's sincere people. People like we were just passionate about, being just 100%, for God and Jesus and everything. And it's not a matter of being jaded or, oh, well, all of that's just no good. It's a matter of being disappointed, like you're saying, in the whole religious system of things and the way things are taught, and you're just
and the
lack of following it.
And the reason I said that I am confident is because there was a time, and I was telling you earlier, there was a time where I wasn't so confident. I was questioning everything. I was questioning the very existence of God. I mean, probably none of y'all ever done that.
Oh, no, I was questioning. We're all holy here.
I was questioning.
Get out.
And I was questioning the very existence, and then for me to come back to that and be unshakable.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely, you could not shake me from that fact today.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a time you could have, but now you can't. And they were in the same. They were doing the same thing. Question God's not answering. I mean, I'm praying all. I'm doing all these things, and this is what they say. All
I'm in Africa, for God's sake.
And my life is this tragedy. I mean, it's like everything's in chaos, and I'm going. And so they question, and everybody's questioning, and I'm like, when I said that, she even told me, she said, "I've never seen you this confident about something."
Yeah. And that's a good testimony.
Yeah.
You're right. And one of the things that I see is that, to your point earlier, the people that we meet, a lot of times they become disenfranchised with the church, or disheartened at religion, or disillusioned with their Christianity or their Judaism, or whatever the case may be. But what they want is they want to know, what does it really say? What am I supposed to do? What do you want from me? It's that deep burning question that they desire a real and lasting relationship with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
What's the term? Confirming bias?
Confirmation bias.
Yeah. People get tired of that after a while because they know. Yeah. In other words, the idea that, well, I'm just going to go along with the flow, so to speak. We're just going to sit here and we're not going to talk about the hard subjects and the hard questions. We're just going to get along and have our little. Yeah. We're always right, no matter what kind of thing. But people eventually get tired, especially sincere Christians that are missionaries, and
they've given everything.
Yeah, they're what's 10%? We're doing 100% here. 110%.
Yeah.
But I mean, eventually people come to the point where they know there's something else out there, and that's kind of where we're at. There, it's like, I'm not going to say we've been there and we're doing that. I'm just saying we're doing that. We have no choice. We have no choice.
Yeah, where else do you go?
Where else do you go?
I mean, this is the last train. It's like
it really is.
I
mean, when I started doing this with Ross, and it's like, from the last church I went to, I said, if this one blows up, which it did, I'm not going to do another one. That's it. Forget it.
But we had gotten to the point, speaking of the tithe, where we were so disillusioned with the church that we started with a couple of friends taking our tithe and going out and buying produce and vegetables and fruit, and going to the poorest neighborhoods we could find and knocking on doors, because we know this is,
you can't go wrong doing right.
But we know this one thing.
That's the thing. It's more so where it's directed as opposed to
an institution, so to speak.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I like the idea, this most ancient faith, what does it look like? I mean, we all grow up with here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to say. Here's the prayer you need to pray. And this guarantees you eternal life. And I thought something was wrong with me because I never felt rockets go off, but I did have this desire to know God. And I wanted to experience it, and I kept listening to people say, "Oh, you didn't, well, I do. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt." And I just kept thinking, I'm not exactly sure what a shadow of a doubt is, but I got some. And the more that I studied and the more that I desired to meet and understand who this God was, it drove me deeper and further and faster. And it is refreshing for me, as I think it is with all of us, to meet other people who are that dedicated. So when we talk about Avram's dedicated ones or his trained ones, in a way, that's who I think we're meeting now. We're meeting those who have given everything. I mean, they have given everything in a desire to serve God. And they still have questions, and they feel like, well, I might not have the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So I just have this idea that there are so many who are out there who still have questions. Our good friend Brian Jones often says, it's like we inherited answers in our particular brand or denomination growing up. What we're looking for now is the questions. Not the answers as much as, we're looking for answers,
questions,
but what are the questions? I like that. And as we work through these things, it's really important for us to keep that in mind. The questions. What are the questions behind the questions, so to speak? So it really is important when people meet, like when I meet with a Russian Orthodox priest. That conversation could have gone south, as we say, very quickly. Honestly, there are things that people say sometimes, when someone says, I've got the whole truth, nothing but the truth, I'm thinking, well, I've met 50 people just like you in the last month. And I'm not saying that anymore. I'm not going to say that. What I tend to say is I'm in search of truth. And along the way, I learned things like, you know what? No matter what the truth or the true interpretation of a certain text is, it's never a bad thing to take money and buy groceries for someone who can't buy them for themselves.
Right.
It's never a bad thing.
Right.
It's not. You can't go wrong. You can't go wrong doing right.
I like what Chad said, though, about I can be pretty passionate now about those three tenets. I know that Jehovah exists. I know that God, it exists.
Yeah.
And I know that his name is Jehovah.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that he, will lead me, guide me, protect me, whatever.
I hold that.
What was the third one?
Well, and that's the God of Abraham.
And Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yeah, that's the biggie, because that kind of eliminates the error of saying, oh, well, God can be anybody you want him to be, or whoever you think he is.
Well, because there is a portion out there that would say they believe in the God of Abraham.
Yes, but not
necessarily Isaac, Jacob, and his name is Jehovah.
And I believe that's part of the revelation of Jacob's ladder story, is that he revealed himself to Jacob in such a way that I believe he can reveal himself to us. That same, if our hearts are truly seeking him, and seeking the truth. And I guess that's where the guidance part,
as someone once said, he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him.
Yeah.
It's I like one of the first lessons that I learned from my Hebrew teacher. Johnny Powell said one time, the center of the Torah. If you counted the words of the Torah, you would come up with an even number of words. And the center, therefore, of the Torah is not one word, but two, then. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. Because it's even. There's not an odd number.
Right.
So there's this word and this word.
So what he said was, he goes, now, if you want to know what the center words are, it's actually one word.
Mm-hmm.
But how can it be that an even number of words would put at the center one word?
Same word.
It's repeated. And the repeating word is seek. It's from Leviticus chapter 10, verse 16. It says, and Moses, English says diligently sought, but in Hebrew it's dorosh darash. Sought. Yes, sought is what it's really saying.
But that isn't that a literary mechanism to emphasize?
It is.
Really seek.
But it says that the center, the heart of the Torah is in the search.
Yeah.
And I love that idea. It always stuck with me because we get this image, that if we truly seek, Deuteronomy 4, when you're scattered among the nations, when you seek him with all your heart and soul, it says you will find him. Now, when we find him, it may be greatly different than what we were brought up to believe. But I'm often reminded these days that not everyone has been searching as long as some others have. It doesn't mean I never say, I know so much. What I'm saying, though, is that we have to be respectful, and we have to remember that people come into this just like we did. They come in with questions. They come in with firmly held beliefs. They want to know the truth, and they think they know it in many regards. We can't crush those people. They're not our sheep.
Right.
They're not our sheep. They belong to the shepherd.
That's what I was thinking of.
Don't abuse them.
Talking about how you're presenting what you've learned to people that may not be at a place where they are ready to hear it. Is like you do consider those people to not crush them or discourage them in their faith or their walk or whatever.
Yeah, I would hate beyond hate for one day for God to say to me, you hurt so-and-so. You caused them to stumble.
Yeah.
You made them lose their faith. I have to somehow, we have to somehow say, oh, it's real. It's real, Stephen. It's so very real. And together we can discern truth. Together we can find answers. But the answers may look differently than what we've been told the answers are. It's just a matter of truly seeking with everything that we have. Like Dave Tyler says, the search is for our entire lives. There is no end. And so as we meet with people who are new on the path, I remember, sometimes our lives give us examples that sometimes play into our spiritual search. I was in a competition when I was in the Army, when I was a kid, basically. And I was part of a 5-person team on what was called the Baton Memorial Death March. And I remember, hearing, as you get word from people who've done it before, if they tell you this, that it's arduous, you'll never make it, and you start taking that, like, you can't do this. You can't. There's a sense in which you drag someone down, or if you believe that it's not achievable. But our message needs to be, look, we are on the most incredible journey. We're ambassadors for the way of the living God. We are those who have set out, and we're willing to give up everything for the pearl of great price, as it's often called. It really does come down to creating a vision of a better state and letting people know that they can achieve that better state. We can find it. It just requires dedication. It requires a constant, vigilant effort to move forward, Think about it. People will sometimes ask me, well, I want you to tell me, what does this faith look, define it. You can give an elevator speech, but think about this. God tells Abram, go to a place that I'll show you. He doesn't tell him what it's going to look like. He doesn't even tell him, because if it had said, you ain't going to believe this, I'm fixing to bring you somewhere, it is the longest walk you've ever, you talk about, it's going to be arduous, it's going to be tough, your dad's going to die, if he would have revealed everything to him, would he have gone? I mean, I would say yeah, but I don't know. I mean, you want to tell people you can do this. Hold my hand. We're going to walk together. Walk together. That's what we have to do.
You can trust Jehovah.
Yep. Put your faith. Trust ye in Yah Yehovah, for he is the rock of ages. Isaiah 26:4. Trust ye in Yehovah. Trust ye in Yah, the rock of ages. Good. So it's an amazing journey. There is this idea that I think about a lot. Few there be that find it. You and I were talking about it, Chad. If we said, and I even said this week, someone actually brought up to me, this woman stopped in and she's talked to me a couple of times, and in various ways she said, why is no one else here? I can get kind of down sometimes. I think, oh man, every week I say Wednesday nights, 6 p.m., come one, come all. And a lot of times nobody comes. But what I've done is I said, well, all right, so I'm up here. I got plenty of books. I need to write. I need to read. I need to study. Don't complain. If you build it, they'll come. I believe that.
Well, and you might be so into what you're writing and studying at that point. If nobody comes, then you just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's an incredible journey, and it is made all the more sweet when I meet people like you guys. I mean, it really benefits me personally. And whenever I'm benefited, it encourages me to keep going forward and to keep doing what we're doing, because we've got a big task ahead of us. I think it's bigger than what we know, and I think it's sooner than what we think, and I think it's more important than what we realize. It involves nothing less than the reunification of the two houses of Israel, which are presently scattered among the nations. They've lost their identity. We have to not only convince them of who they are, but show them what they need to do. It's a big deal. It's a big task. It's the work. It's the work. And until we accept that mission at all cost, we're not going to move the ball forward, so to speak. What else? Anybody have any other thoughts before we close? All right. So what we'll do is, just so it's not confusing, Friday, I'll send out an email to the email group. So if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. You don't need to be on Facebook. If you're opposed to it, you just simply subscribe to the email. We'll kind of do a recap, a bulletin of what's happened in the previous week, things that are going on in United Israel. I might even include news stories that are important for us today to stay on top of, sort of a brief summary. Here's what's going on. Netanyahu's been in the U.S., kind of report on those things. And then Saturday, same time, same channel, come back, and we'll see you again next week.
And then if Erin has a study at her house, maybe you can
on Sunday. Yeah, I can advertise that. Yeah, I'll ask her if that's okay. and then the other thing, just remember, we have a United Israel conference that's coming up. I am working on the program now. I've gotten a couple of the titles that came in. Now it's a matter of putting people in the right place and organizing it. We're putting together what I think is going to be a fantastic program. I have a gentleman, an author, a scholar flying in from Israel, by the way. Surprise, surprise. We'll talk more about that. I have Dr. James Tabor is going to be talking, the Tylers. I have Ralph Bunton, Jodelle Onstadt. It's still in the works, but we have a couple of other people. We're going to squeeze in 50 pounds of information in a 5-pound sack and try to get it done in one weekend. So
vacuum pack, baby.
That's right. Squeeze it, whatever. So please, if you can come, and I noticed this morning that a couple more have subscribed. I did reserve Temple Sinai. It's going to be a great here I do my Trump thing. It's going to be a great thing. We're going to be
Huge.
It's going to be huge. It's going to be an amazing. But we're going to have the conference at Temple Sinai. Our intention is to webcast it live. We haven't paid yet for those things, but so they told me how much it costs to rent the synagogue. We've got to do that. We've got to get the internet hooked up over there. Dave, you ready? And I'm looking forward to it greatly. So if you haven't seen the synagogue, it's interesting that in our little town, a Jewish synagogue was built in 1901. It's beautiful. And I'm looking forward to it. So April 28th, 29th, and 30th here in St. Francisville. Go to the website, select news and events or whatever it's called, and you'll see the drop down for you to register. Mm-hmm. Please register. I have to know you're coming so that I can make preparations.
Make religion great again.
Make religion great. Make religion great again. That's right. That's my platform. So tomorrow at Aaron's house, there's a study, and all of you are welcome to join. Come in tomorrow.
Yes,
we're not webcasting that, but
there's no internet.
we're gonna be moving into Daniel chapter 7, the Son of Man coming on the clouds. Wow. Who is this Son of Man? Who are these who fly on the clouds like doves, as Isaiah says? So looking forward to that. Have a wonderful day. Shabbat shalom, Shavua Tov.
Shalom, y'all.
We love you. We thank you for joining us. See you next week.